Two stories, one conflict, how the Israel-Palestine crisis is told differently in the US and abroad. In this video, we're going to explore how the Israel-Palestine conflict is remembered, framed, and taught differently in the United States versus the rest of the world. Just like the Cuban Missile Crisis, this conflict isn't only about borders, violence, or diplomacy. It's also about competing historical narratives, political identity, and national mythology. But before we start, I'm on a road to get 1,000 subs as a small channel. If you want to help me, then like, subscribe, and enjoy watching this video. Thank you. To understand how this story is told differently, let's start with the basics. The roots of the conflict go back to the early 20th century, when Jewish and Arab nationalist movements both laid claim to the same territory under Ottoman and later British control. After the horrors of the Holocaust, international support grew for a Jewish homeland, and in 1947, the United Nations proposed a plan to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The plan was accepted by Jewish leaders and rejected by many Arab ones. When the State of Israel declared independence in 1948, neighboring Arab countries invaded. Israel survived the war and expanded its territory beyond the UN plan. In the process, over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. A mass exodus Palestinians call al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. In 1967, Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and other territories during the Six-Day War. These areas remain central to the conflict today. Over time, peace efforts have stalled, Israeli settlements have expanded, and Gaza has endured repeated bombardments and a blockade. Millions of Palestinians still live under occupation or in refugee camps with limited rights and no recognized state. In the United States, the dominant framing of the conflict often centers on Israel as a small democratic ally surrounded by hostile neighbors. Media, textbooks, and political rhetoric frequently describe the conflict in terms of Israel's right to self-defense, with less attention to Palestinian grievances or international law. Let's look at how this appears in a standard U.S. high school history textbook. Following its establishment in 1948, Israel faced repeated attacks from Arab states and militant groups. Despite ongoing threats, Israel maintained its democracy and defended itself against terrorism, particularly from Hamas and Hezbollah. The United States has supported Israel as a stable democratic partner in the Middle East. This version of the story emphasizes resilience, democracy, and defense. It typically avoids mentioning Israel's military occupation, the expansion of settlements, or the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. In political discourse, bipartisan support for Israel is common. Presidents, senators, and representatives often refer to Israel as America's strongest ally in the region. A common talking point is that the U.S. and Israel share common values like freedom and democracy. Legislation frequently prioritizes Israel's security and condemns attacks from Palestinian militant groups, while rarely addressing underlying structural issues like statelessness or inequality. Even American pop culture, from TV shows to Marvel movies, often depicts Israel positively or omits the conflict entirely. Meanwhile, pro-Palestinian narratives are more often associated with fringe or activist movements and are subject to political controversy. Outside the United States, the narrative shifts. In Europe, Africa, Latin America, and especially in the Arab and Muslim world, the focus is less on Israel's security and more on Palestinian rights, occupation, and international law. Let's look at an excerpt from a history textbook used in parts of Europe. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is rooted in a legacy of colonialism and displacement. Following the 1948 war and the 1967 occupation, millions of Palestinians became stateless. Israel's continued control over the West Bank, settlement expansion, and blockade of Gaza have been condemned by the United Nations and international human rights groups. In this version, Israel is not simply a democracy under threat, but also a military occupier with legal responsibilities under international law. Palestinian resistance, including both violent and nonviolent forms, is often interpreted in this context as part of a broader anti-colonial struggle. International bodies, such as the United Nations, have passed numerous resolutions criticizing Israeli policies. UN agencies describe Gaza as an open-air prison and settlements in the West Bank as illegal under international law. Reports from groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have used terms like apartheid to describe the dual legal systems that exist for Israelis and Palestinians in the occupied territories. In post-colonial nations such as South Africa, India, and Algeria, the Palestinian cause often resonates deeply. South African leaders, including Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, openly compared the Israeli occupation to apartheid. In many of these countries, support for Palestine is seen not just as a foreign policy stance, but as a moral position rooted in shared histories of occupation and resistance. In the Arab world, the conflict is often experienced as a regional trauma. Palestinian displacement, refugee camps, and the repeated violence in Gaza are covered intensively in Arab media. Networks like Al Jazeera dedicate extensive airtime to documenting life under occupation. Home demolitions, military raids, restrictions on movement, and daily hardships faced by ordinary Palestinians. The narrative here casts Israel as a settler colonial state supported by Western powers, especially the U.S., at the expense of Arab and Palestinian self-determination. In textbooks in countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, the Palestinian cause is tied to broader themes of Arab nationalism and justice. Some curricula frame Israel's creation as a result of colonial imposition and betrayal by the West. However, narratives vary across the region, especially in countries that have signed peace treaties or normalized relations with Israel, such as Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. The role of media in shaping these narratives cannot be overstated. In the U.S., media coverage often begins when there's violence, such as a rocket launched from Gaza, with headlines like "Israel under attack." This framing implies that Israeli actions are responses, not provocations. Israeli officials are often quoted prominently, while Palestinian sources receive less attention or are portrayed as less credible. In contrast, international media like the BBC, The Guardian, Le Monde, or Der Spiegel frequently lead with Palestinian casualties and provide context on occupation, settlement activity, or the conditions in Gaza. Visual imagery also differs. While U.S. outlets may show missile defense systems like the Iron Dome, foreign media are more likely to show the aftermath of Israeli airstrikes or funerals of Palestinian civilians. Social media has disrupted some of these divides. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter/X have allowed Palestinians and pro-Palestinian activists to bypass traditional gatekeepers and present their perspectives directly to global audiences, often using hashtags, infographics, or on-the-ground footage. But this too is contested. Algorithms, moderation policies, and disinformation campaigns continue to shape what people see. In the United States, the Israel-Palestine conflict is often underrepresented in school curricula. When it is included, the emphasis tends to reflect dominant political viewpoints. Israel as a democratic state under constant threat, Palestinians as either victims of extremist leaders or obstacles to peace. Meanwhile, in European and Middle Eastern schools, students are often taught a more detailed and historically grounded account. British textbooks, for instance, often explain the role of the British Mandate and the Balfour Declaration. German and French students are sometimes encouraged to explore multiple perspectives, including those of refugees and international legal scholars. In Palestinian schools, unsurprisingly, the Nakba and ongoing occupation are central to national identity. Students learn about lost villages, displaced families, and the limitations imposed by checkpoints, barriers, and military control. Critics have accused both Israeli and Palestinian textbooks of omitting key perspectives or promoting nationalistic bias, a reminder that no educational system is truly neutral. Polling shows the divergence in public attitudes. In the United States, support for Israel has traditionally been strong, especially among older Americans, evangelical Christians, and political elites. However, younger Americans, especially progressives and people of color, are increasingly sympathetic to Palestinians. A 2023 Gallup poll showed that for the first time, more Democrats sympathized with Palestinians than with Israelis, a significant shift. Globally, public support for Palestinians remains strong in much of the global South, including Latin America, Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa. In Europe, public opinion is mixed, but generally more critical of Israeli settlement expansion and military operations in Gaza. The sharp divide in narratives is also visible in international diplomacy. At the United Nations, the U.S. often vetoes resolutions critical of Israel, while many other countries vote in favor. These diplomatic patterns reflect not just geopolitical interest, but also different ways of understanding history and justice. So, why do these narratives diverge so dramatically? Because history is never just a list of facts. It's also about perspective, identity, and power. Nations tell the stories they need to tell to justify their policies, reinforce their values, or shape public memory. The United States tells a story of democratic solidarity and national security. Other countries tell a story of displacement, occupation, and resistance. Ultimately, the Israel-Palestine conflict isn't just a geopolitical standoff. It's a war of words, symbols, textbooks, and headlines. And until we recognize how these different narratives function and why they exist, we won't fully understand the conflict or the prospects for peace. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to support independent educational media, consider becoming a member. See you next time.